Hello, class, and welcome to Chapter 4. I am Miss Maria, and I would just like to thank you for being in my class. We are going to be talking about Chapter 4. You have read Chapters 1, 2, and 3 on your own, and I appreciate you doing that. We have built a foundation from Chapters 1, Chapters 2, and Chapter 3, but now we're actually getting into the theories that surround early childhood. And the first theory that we're going to be talking about is this constructionalist learning, which is building from within. Galileo said, "You cannot teach a man anything. You can only help him find it within himself." And that is the premise or the foundational basis for constructivist learning. For many teachers, being in the role of this co-creator in this theory is a very exciting process because they jointly learn with the students while skillfully guiding their explorations. And it's exciting, and it's also very refreshing. The possibilities for reinventing this classroom climate is extremely well known, and it is starting to become very trustworthy. A lot of your principal foundational theories are actually built on this theory. And in essence, you are basically, as a teacher, unlocking the potential or the possibility of thoughtful and collaborative translations of learning within the children. And so that's a very exciting thing to think about. So let's move and begin to learn exactly what this theory is. So our starting question is to think about a time when you were allowed to choose a topic of interest to you to learn about. Was your ability to choose the topic meaningful? Did it give you some sort of wonderful feeling that you could make a choice? Well, this is basically what we're thinking about when we're talking about giving this potential to possible children coming up with this thoughtful and collaborative translations of theory into practice in their learning experiences. I had gone to see a movie, and I came out of the movie to go to the restroom, and when I did, this mother and two little boys who were 3 and 4 were going into the restroom with me. And the mother, of course, sent them to the restroom, and I went on to the restroom. When I came out, the mother was still in her stall using the restroom, but the two boys were taking their hands with the dryer and putting their hand underneath the dryer and pulling it back out, putting it under there, and then giggling when the dryer would turn on, turn off, turn on, turn off. Well, I sat there and watched them for a few minutes, smiling within myself of thinking, that this is a process. They are learning science. They don't even know what they're doing. They're playing. They're having such a wonderful time of that cause and effect. When I do this, this noise happens. When I put my hand in there, it makes a noise. When I pull my hand out, it stops. That's cause and effect. That's a science learning experience. When the mother walked out of the stall, she immediately saw me looking at them, and in her mind thought that the boys were being disruptive. And so she kept saying to them, stop it now, don't do that, you're being rude, blah, blah, blah. And I wanted to say, you just stopped a learning experience for your two little children. That was a science experiment. They were just being children. And yes, I understand there's an appropriate place to do things and an inappropriate place. But when you get to choose your topic or something that is making you laugh or something that that you're getting to put part of you in, then that is meaningful. And that's what we're talking about with this. The next question is to recall a moment when you've learned something particularly meaningful. How did you come to that knowledge? What was the context surrounding that learning experience? And was there something personal that made you choose that particular memory? One of the exercises that I do when I teach IEC 221, which is creative expressions, is I have the students go out because it's always taught in in the spring, so we get the winter months. And I have them go out in the snow when it's snowing and actually put their face up and have the snowflakes fall on their face and touch their tongue. And I ask them, how did you feel during this? Where did you go when you were sitting there thinking about all this snow just falling on your face? Oh, yes, you talk about it cold, but we're looking at aesthetic experiences, and that's what this is called, aesthetics. Constructivism is an aesthetic experience where children go in and they actually experience meaningful learning experiences that they have a desire to learn about. And that's what causes your memory. When constructivism people talk about that, they say the teaching strategy there causes their memory to reflect back, and they hold that memory. Constructivism is also known for the word scaffolding. And scaffolding involves using verbal cues and questions and prompts to engage this inquiry of learning. So when you see that word, always associate that with this theory. Come on, let's go to the next. And do you prefer to be simply told something, or would you prefer to test ideas out for yourself? How would you test them? Just like the two little boys, you stick your hand under the dryer, you pull it out. You stick your hand under the dryer, you giggle because it's like magic. You put your hand under there, there's a noise. Take your hand out, there's not a noise. It's magical, and it intrigues a learning in children. How wonderful can that be? So what do they say constructivism is? A theory of knowledge and learning which posits that children actively engage with their world, and their world being people, experiences, materials, and they build their beliefs and knowledge through an interaction of internal cognitive processes that happen within their brain. So the roles of the learner are asking and answering questions, scaffolding, and you as the teacher, you come in, you ask these pertinent questions. Johnny, what colors are you working with today? Johnny, what happens when you put your hand under the dryer? What happens when you take your hand out from the dryer? You're scaffolding that learning experience. Oh, if I put my hand under here, it makes a noise. I take my hand out, it doesn't. Wow. You're making a scientific hypothesis. If I put my hand under here, will it make a noise? The prediction is, yes, it will. Or it could be a simple guess. I hope it does. That's what they always want to say, is I hope it does. And then testing those predictions. If I do it again, will it do it? Yes. If I do it again, will it do it? Wow. That is testing a prediction. They are become scientists when they begin to do that. Isn't that neat? And they dialogue with their peers and their teachers, like the two little boys that were laughing with each other. Even though it was giggling, they were dialoguing with their peers. And I, as a teacher, was observing that, not in a teacher role, just as an early childhood professional, looking on and watching that situation. And if I were in a classroom and that was happening, let me ask you this. If you were the teacher and that was happening in the restroom, would you scold the children? Or would you take charge of that teachable moment? Now, I'm not talking about going into the bathroom and taking water and splashing it all over the drywall and the floor. That's inappropriate behavior. If we want to teach them something about water, we need to do that in a controlled situation. However, if a child notices that and he's drying his hands, could we not dialogue and help them by scaffolding a behavior or a learning experience directly onto that and then moving right along? That's dialoguing with peers and teachers in an appropriate situation. Confronting cognitive conflict, like to challenge the beliefs and ideas. For instance, could we put something else up there and make that noise? Or what if we stand back here and just wave our hand? Does the noise happen with the blow dryer then, the hand dryer? No. We have to put our hand directly under the hand dryer for the motion sensor to kick on. That is challenging the beliefs and the ideas. That's a given there. Exploring and reflecting on results and experiences. Well, Johnny, how many times did you stick your hand under the dryer? How many times did it come on? And having them actually put the results down on paper where they understand. And here you have to be very creative on how you get children to reflect on their work. Do you take pictures? Do you have them draw pictures? That is reflecting on their work. It gives them something to think about. So what are the roles as a teacher in this theory? Well, first of all, like I said, you're posing and engaging questions and in challenging problems. It's called scaffolding. SCALFOLDING, scaffolding. Secondly, you're providing information when needed. Well, if we need to go and look on the computer and we need to see where seeds come from and how they grow, how do we plant these seeds to make them grow into big tomato plants or big pumpkins in the fall? How do we do that? We need to give the children information, and then we need to allow them to investigate. We are supporting student inquiry and experimentation when we actually provide the things and begin to ask the questions that lead to their learning. We suggest and we model problem-solving strategies. Well, let's see if this works. If we plant pumpkin seeds in applesauce, will they grow? If we plant pumpkin seeds in dirt, will it grow? And we actually get the children to think critically and problem solve. No, pumpkin seeds won't grow in applesauce. They'll grow in dirt. Well, do we just leave them in the dirt? Or what do we do to make the pumpkin seeds grow in the dirt? What should we add? Sunshine? Water? All those things go into growing pumpkins, and we're teaching them to problem solve that. We're observing student action and dialogue, and from their dialogue and what they do, we are actually teaching them to come up to the next step. in the learning process and moving toward that goal. And then we're assessing student process and their progress by taking pictures, by writing notes, keeping work samples, recording conversations between the child and the teacher. These are all part of the teaching strategies and the assessment strategies of this theory. And if you look on page 92, you will actually see that in table 4.2 of all the teaching strategies and assessment strategies involved in this theory. Constructivism can be very busy. Teachers have to be very interactive with this. The children are active, they're moving. There's not a lot of time to sit around. It's very hands-on. It's moving fast. It's personal. If you've got 10 2-year-olds in a room, you've got 10 different projects going on at one time. So it can be very big. It can be very collaborative. You're going to see a lot of kids asking questions. What are you doing? I want to do what you're doing. This type of thing. So they get to begin to collaborate with each other, see what each other's working on, and get involved all the way around. So there's a lot of interaction between the teacher and the student, between student and student, all the way around. It's challenging. When you have a huge room like that of 10 2-year-olds moving around and they're all busy, or 3-year-olds, it can be challenging because not only do you deal with their behaviors and who they are in from a developmental standpoint, you've got all this busyness going on at one time. So you have to be very supportive. You have to give them social, emotional support because they're 2-year-olds and they need it, but you also have to give them support in their learning, being there to give them what it takes to grow pumpkin seeds, being over here, what does it take to build a barn, being over here saying, what does it take to get a raccoon in a cage, or whatever they are wanting to learn about. And you have to make sure that everything is meaningful to each and every one of those children. So there's a big social part that happens in your classroom. As I said, you've got to provide that social, emotional support. And, oh my goodness, it's dynamic in what happens. The dynamics within the classroom management, the way the kids react to each other. These are all dynamics that happen. You have individuals and you have group efforts, and that's what I'm talking about, dynamics. And you've got to know who works well with each other and who does this and who does that. That's all part of what's happening in this theory. From a historical perspective, it came about in the 1500s with Francis Bacon when he emphasized learner-centered methods that rely on problem solving and inquiry. And then you come in and you see in the 1900s John Dewey, who advocated for engaged students in interactive, interest-based learning. So you see theory upon theory beginning to build in this perspective. And then, of course, you have Jean Piaget and Vygotsky shaping current practices of what is happening today and mixing the two together to actually create this learning-based model that we have in place for early childhood right now. So what did Jean Piaget say? He said children actively search for meaning. And he is the father of early childhood, so we need to listen to what he says. Knowledge is an individual construct built through maturation, or how they mature, and experiences that challenge current thinking. Cognitive conflict is an essential part whereby new information experience contradicts beliefs, promoting search for new understanding. So, in other words, if we were a river, if our classroom was a river, and all of a sudden it became stagnant and the water did not move. Let's consider that a non-cognitive conflict. Everything stayed the same. But that movement of water that flows in a stream becomes the cognitive conflict, actually, that creates new understanding and new learning. And it promotes that within children. So you want your classroom to be like running water. You want it to run through, causing cognitive conflict so that children can learn. They contradict their beliefs today to grow into another learning concept. They contradict it tomorrow to learn into a new concept. And their water doesn't become stagnant. So individual cognitive process is a key. Piaget tells us that all children learn on a continuum. A continuum meaning that milestone after milestone after milestone, they all fall in the same order. It doesn't matter if children are special needs or they're very high-functioning, brilliant kids, or they're just normal. They still have to go through every milestone to get to the top. Some go faster, some go normal, some go a little slower, but they still move on the individual cognitive process continuum in the same order. He set that up for us, and that's how we get our milestones. Development leads learning. So as a child matures, that's when he said that knowledge is an individual construct built through maturation. He's talking about in their early childhood development, or the way they move through that continuum, the way they move through those milestones leads to their learning. So as a teacher, when you know your group of students and their milestones and where they are, you know how to lead them toward the next milestone and emerge that skill, because you are to be an expert in their development and know that continuum so that you can process and give them information to help them learn. Now, Vygotsky, on the other hand, his contribution to this is that there's a social exchange between teacher and student in the essence of the learning process. Piaget says children actively engage in their environment and learn. Vygotsky says if there's not a teacher there, the student, in essence, the learning process is going to stop. Knowledge is a shared construct influenced by interactions, culture, and experiences. Learning leads development. So Piaget and Vygotsky both agree that children learn on that continuum, and that, as we know, well, actually, they don't agree. They disagree, because Piaget says development leads learning. Vygotsky says learning leads development. He says that if the teacher doesn't teach, then the development does not happen on the continuum. That's where they differ. Struggle through challenging tasks is extremely essential in Vygotsky's contribution to this. He says that children have to struggle in order for their tasks to be essential in their learning. They literally have to fight for their knowledge. They have to have the will to get in there and fight for their knowledge. And language influences and organizes their thought. So if they don't have language, that's what Vygotsky says. Language is extremely important in his contribution. Now, when we look at the distinction between the branches of constructivism, we see that both Piaget and Vygotsky, Piaget being the cognitive developmental, Vygotsky being the social cultural, they are primary advocates for this, but their learner roles are different. Their view of their knowledge is different. And you can see that compared here. The role of the peer and the social partners are different because the peers in Piaget's thing, they provoke cognitive conflict. But in the Vygotsky's, the more expert partner, which is the teacher, purposely guides exploration of ideas. This is known as the active role, where Vygotsky's is a very passive role. Now, the relationship of development and learning is, remember I said development leads learning with Piaget? Vygotsky says learning leads development. I've already explained that. Relationship between language and thought. Piaget says language and knowledge, construction, connection is not emphasized. But Vygotsky says language promotes as strongly influencing thought. So when I say it to the child, instead of them allowing them to experience it and come up with it, I go ahead and tell it to them, Vygotsky says. Just tell it to them. The challenges of theory to practice are basically this. It is definitely a challenge classroom-wise. If the knowledge is co-constructed, what do you teach? How to convey those key content in interest-based inquiry, how do you do that? Shouldn't teachers be teaching? That's a thought. Suggestion is, you guide students toward necessary content through active inquiry, challenge, and exploration. You balance direct lessons with interest-based projects. You guide, facilitating, you question, you observe. Modeling is good for teachers to do. That scaffolding part brings it together. An authentic assessment, there's portfolios where children have examples of their work. There's performance assessment. There's dynamic assessment, providing a picture before and a picture after. There's rubrics, observation, interviews, dialogue transcripts, work samples that are all collected over time. Constructive teaching needs more comprehensive, in-depth, broad, authentic assessments in addition to standardized measures. And consider using more richly some very descriptive methods in your authentic assessments as what we've just talked about, because these are our authentic assessment pieces. This is actually, the next step is table 4.2, and I'd really like for you to spend some time in your research this week looking through this table and talking about it with people around you. So let's talk about some reflection questions here. So what elements of a constructive, inspired classroom do you agree with? What aspects do you disagree with, and why? Can you see that in our theory today, based on what Macy says is developmentally appropriate practice, can you see a lot of constructivism ideas? Can you see a lot of Piaget? Can you see a lot of Vygotsky? I think a good curriculum in theory comes from a lot of different views, because we have so much research coming at us that we can actually pick and choose the best practice, best thoughts that are coming into play. And when we develop our own personal philosophy of education, as we have started doing in this class, then you need to get in here and figure out, what do I believe that Piaget says is right? What do I believe that Vygotsky says is right? What do I believe about this constructivism theory? Do I believe it? What parts do I believe? Think about classroom experiences that you may have had that were good and meaningful to you. And what was it about those experiences that made it positive? What did the teacher, other children, and you do in these experiences? And how did it become so meaningful to you as a child? Do these experiences align with constructive theory? Were you one of those children that was total in a Vygotsky room where a teacher just barked, barked, barked? Or did you have a combination classroom where teachers taught you, but then you also had a time to be creative and learn on your own? Or were you immersed in a classroom that was just totally based on what you wanted to do? Thank you so much for joining me for Chapter 4.